Welcome to Finscale, a podcast created by Solène Niederkorn, shedding light on innovation in finance, banking, and insurance.
Digital Frontiers in Finance. Chris Skinner, founder of the Finanser.
When I started it, my theme was the friction between decentralizing finance versus centralized finance, and the whole issue between cryptocurrencies and central bank digital currencies, and the role of a bank in that process. And then it became intelligent finance and intelligent money, which is, what if we made every transaction intelligent using ChatGPT or Bard or something similar? And obviously that's the hot topic right now in 2023. I don't know what it'll be in 2024. It does get interesting that if you could decentralize money and make it intelligent, what role does a bank have?
In a time when many are returning to work after some holidays, it was an honor to interview Chris, who has been a preeminent voice in the finance and tech world for the past 2 decades. In this insightful episode, Chris sheds light on the intricacies of digital transformation in banking, reflecting on its imminent future amidst game changers like blockchain. He emphasized the pivotal role of digitisation in fostering financial inclusion, especially in underbanked regions, and discusses how technology can proactively address environmental and societal challenges, a theme central to his book, Digital for Good. He also shares pearls of wisdom from his journey with the Finanser, his influential blog, brimming with advice, sharp humor, and a wealth of innovative ideas. A discussion truly worth its weight in gold. Enjoy the show! Hi, everyone. Hi, Chris.
Hi.
I'm really honored to have you on my podcast, Chris. You're an authority on fintech, banking and tech, and I would like to discuss many things with you today. Can you maybe introduce yourself before we talk about the future of finance and the Finanser?
Sure. I'm known mainly as somebody who says the way it is. I've been doing that for almost 20 years when I started blogging at thefinanser.com. And before I started blogging and writing books, I've produced over 20 books. I was a professional in technology and financial services, which these days everyone calls fintech. Back then we called it technology and banking, technology and financial services. So that's me.
Okay, perfect. So as I said, there are many different domains that I would like to dive into with you today. The first of this topic is the way tech can really address the evolution of the financial sector and support the transformation, the digital transformation of incumbent in particular. So maybe we can start with this very simple question, and considering that you know very well the industry and you've been working in banks and financial institutions. So how would you say are the key success factor for banks and incumbent players to successfully undergo digital transformation based on your experiences and the interviews you had with all those banks?
Well, I think there's a number of different pressure points, which is, on the one hand, if you're in a bank, keeping things stable and secure. And on the other hand, if you're in a startup technology company, changing the system and making everything different. And there's a lot of opportunity using technology to reinvent the financial system. But the challenge that you bump into, as evidenced regularly by many fintech companies, is a lack of knowledge of regulation compliance and the reason why the financial system is structured the way it is. I don't know of a single bank that ever went to a regulator and said, please give us more regulation. But having said that, the reason why they have so many regulations is to keep things stable and secure. Mm-hmm. And this is a friction we see between innovation and regulation, between market progression and market stagnation. To a large extent, as a customer of a bank, I'm quite happy to have my bank being stagnating and snoozing. I'm not happy about the bank making so much money out of me, but that's another story. I mean, the point I'm making is that a bank makes huge amounts of profit out of its customers, whether they're corporate, commercial, investment, assets, or retail. Every part of a bank makes a lot of money. And the whole reason is that banks are there to be boring and stable and regulated by governments to ensure they don't lose our assets or our money. As a fintech startup, I wanted to disrupt that and change it and stop it and, create a whole different world. But a lot of the startups have no understanding as to the reason why it is the way it is.
And do you think that financial institutions are not able to perform a proper digital transformation? That's what you mean?
Financial institutions can transform. I've interviewed quite a lot of them, as you know, around their digital transformation projects. And the biggest challenge they have is the executive leadership team. It's not the board, it's not the middle management or the people on the ground, it's the executives themselves. And when you go to a bank's executive leadership team, how many of them have any background in technology and internet and digital servicing or mobile services? Very few. And that's an indictment of the industry. There's very few banks I've ever met that have people who are really, in their blood, immersed in the technology industry. If you're going to be a digital or mobile bank, you really have to have half of your executives at least having a career path that was involved in technology and telecommunications. And if you don't have that, then you're not fit for the future, to be honest.
Yes, the problem I see, and I've been working for quite a while in banks, is also the problem of culture and the will to change. I mean, people are not incentivized to change as the system itself. And even if you have a few people in the area, in the executive committee, for instance, tech savvy and really keen on moving forward, the problem is that generally the culture is not sufficiently open for changes. Is it something that you can confirm based on your experience?
All banks are different. So even if I come to Luxembourg, I can find lots of different attitudes amongst the banks. And particularly because Luxembourg is famous for private banking amongst the private banks. So every country, every institution is different. And within institutions, every part of the institution is different, whether you're dealing with the private bank, the investment bank, the retail bank, the commercial, corporate bank, et cetera, et cetera. So you can't generalize these things. But if I was to say overall, having met so many different companies in financial markets, the number one issue they all have is the ability for an executive to commit to change, because committing to change is almost getting turkeys to vote for Christmas. It's kind of saying that I'm willing to give up my job and risk my job on this gamble. And I don't see many executives willing to take that gamble. And I've seen that throughout my career. And it's still very true to right now and today.
And do you think that with the emergence of the internet of value, the banking environment and landscape will evolve? And if this is the case, what strategies should companies adopt to compete?
Well, I've just finished my newest book. It's going through the editing cycle, so it'll come out in 2024. And what was interesting is that when I started it, my theme was the friction between decentralizing finance versus centralized finance, and the whole issue between cryptocurrencies and central bank digital currencies, and the role of a bank in that process. And then it became intelligent finance and intelligent money, which is, what if we made every transaction intelligent using ChatGPT or Bard or something similar? And obviously that's the hot topic right now in 2023. I don't know what it'll be in 2024, but it does get interesting that if you could decentralize money and make it intelligent, what role does a bank have?
So what's your conclusion?
I was going to leave that one with you. My view is that you can decentralize finance and make it intelligent with AI, but you still need regulation, and you still need some governance, and you still need some structure, which is giving the stability and security of confidence and trust, which I always come back to: confidence and trust, and stability and security and regulation, because without that, you've just got Sam Bankman-Fried, or Sam Bankman-Fried, as I call him, FTX, Mt. Gox, Quadrant, all the failed cryptocurrency platforms that have been out there. And if I'm honest, there's so many failures of cryptocurrencies, and everyone goes, oh, therefore they're the Wild West and we can't use them. And the answer is no, they're not the Wild West. The problem they have is it's the platforms that are trading them. It's not the currencies themselves. If we could work out the structure to decentralize finance with intelligence and regulation and trust, then you would have a system that's revolutionized financial services for the internet age. Yeah. And that's about where we're going right now. And that's the theme of my new book. Plug.
And talk about some interesting books that you wrote. There is one that is called Digital for Good. You correct me if I'm wrong, huh? And you discuss how technology and finance can address environmental and social issues. Can you share a few examples that you have included in your book where this has been effectively implemented?
Yeah, I mean, each of the books that I've written have developed different themes. So, Digital Bank was obviously about how to become a digital bank. Digital and doing digital was the banks that were trying to actually do digital transformation. Digital for Good is actually an amalgamation of over 20 different views from around the world, covering 5 continents. It didn't include Antarctica and the Arctic Circle for some reason. I'll have to talk to polar bears and penguins next time. But the whole theme was how can we use technology to look after the future of the world? And how can we use finance to look after the future of the world? And how can we use technology and finance together to look after the future of the world? And it developed from initially something I encountered in Ant Financial in Hangzhou, China, when I saw a poster of Jack Ma saying, let's use technology to make the world a better place and society a better society. It really struck home with me. And since then, I found so many companies, hundreds of companies, and it doesn't just include startups, it includes banks like Triodos, which is a Dutch bank. But there are many others like Arlandsbanken in Finland, who are trying to use technology and finance together to protect the future of our planet and climate. And my passion is not climate, to be honest, because although we have a climate emergency, as demonstrated by all the wildfires and floods that we've seen in 2023, it's actually biodiversity. It's protecting habitats of animals, because I'm a huge animal lover. And I'm really worried that we're decimating and making extinct most of the animals of this world. And that's what I want to protect. So I want to find a bank that resonates with my values. And that was one of the big themes of the books, that I realized over time that Gen Z, or Gen Z if you're American, and millennials and boomers want to look after the future of our world using technology and finance. And that was the whole theme of that book.
And when it comes to financial inclusion, so financial inclusion is very important under developed regions. And I had my first special edition was about the way fintech was revolutionizing inclusion in Africa. How do you see that evolving? And do you think that the blockchain technology can really bring something very different in terms of financial inclusion in those underdeveloped regions?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, financial inclusion through not blockchain necessarily, but more network technologies. So from 2G to 5G, we've been through these developments of the mobile technology services. And in fact, I met a very interesting company in Kenya some years ago who were developing 2G technologies to identify location of where the customer was who was sending money using text messaging. Now, obviously, 5G is far more advanced. But all those technologies of the mobile services and network services had transformed financial services and financial inclusion. And I think the big thing for me is that financial inclusion, someone said to me some years ago, why is it that banks think it's some sort of charitable thing? As in, giving a customer who's living on $1 a day or $5 a day is, a charitable thing. It's not. It's actually making money. And you see that from WeBank, which is part of WeChat Pay in China, to Nubank, which is a massive unicorn fintech startup in South America, to M-Pesa, who's one of the oldest and best known providers of text messaging payments in Kenya. There are so many examples where financial inclusion is driving innovation. And the core of this, and the biggest problem we have, is that the poorest people pay the most for transactions and payments. And if we can solve that through technology using mobile networking, then that's fantastic. And we are getting there. It's slow, but it is happening.
Yeah. One last question, and then I would like to talk about the Finanser. Is you've been added to the MAD 33 list for inspirational change and transformation leaders. Congratulations. I would be interested that you share with us some insight or advice for aspiring leaders who really want to make the difference and make the future a reality.
Well, I think the biggest thing is if you're leading a startup or a traditional bank, you have different things you have to deal with. If you're leading a startup, you probably have a very strong vision, an idea of where you want to go. And I would personally say that most young visionaries need a wrinkled, grey-haired person to hold their hand. And I offer myself as that person, obviously. But it's very much around, if you haven't been around the markets, then you don't know how the markets work. And a good example of that is the question asked to Jamie Dimon, who's the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, by his daughter when the financial crisis occurred of 2008. And she said, "What is a financial crisis?" And he said, "Something that happens every 5 to 7 years." So if you understand that, then you know how to deal with it. And I think particularly in 2023, where we're seeing what I call the fintech bloodbath and the crypto winter, someone who's been around the block who can assist and guide in that process is very important. Equally, though, on the other hand, if you're a financial company and you've been around the block and you have that understanding, the issue you have is ingrained DNA that says we don't need to change. We can just do what we've always done. And if you just do what you've always done, you always get what you always did. And it kind of doesn't work anymore because the world has moved on. So you need to move on. And I think it's very hard to persuade financial executives in the executive leadership team, who I mentioned, to get with it in terms of see the change, embrace the change, and move on with the change. It's very hard to do that when you've been doing what you've done for 20 or 30 years.
Clearly. And don't you think that bringing diversity and more tech-oriented person at the board can change? Meaning that if you have that kind of board constitution, then you can ensure that you have an executive committee that is more motivated to move in that direction?
Yeah, I'd like to say yes. But when I look at this question of diversity, I normally walk into boardrooms in traditional companies that are primarily male and old and white. And the day that I find more females or those who identify as whatever sex they want to be and of different nations and colors, then I will celebrate. At the moment, I don't see that.
We all agree. Any other advice, or we can move to the Finanser?
I think my final advice is we all recognize that artificial intelligence is going to have a massive impact on our world and jobs. And if I look at artificial intelligence in financial services, I kind of feel there's an awful lot of stuff that we do that can be completely automated by the system. So then the question is, what do the people do? My answer has always been relationships. And then I start to wonder about this because I saw something the other day that was a survey of over 3,000 questions or people, rather, questioning doctors. And they didn't know whether they're talking to Chat GPT or an AI engine versus a human real doctor. But they found, and surprisingly, the end of the survey was the artificial intelligence was far better at dealing with humans than the doctors. So you kind of wonder, I guess it's because the doctors are under pressure and time, and the systems are not. But you kind of wonder, so what role do we humans have 30, 50, 100 years from now? And that is a big debate that may be the form of my next book. Little known fact is that Elon Musk's grandfather, Joshua Holdman, was the founder of the technocrat movement. And the technocrat movement had this vision that the future is where machines do everything for us and we just live in a fantasy world. Maybe that is our future. That's a bit frightening, though.
Yeah. Clearly, it's frightening me, to be honest. Okay, thank you very much, Chris. Very insightful. Now, we know you, of course, because we all see you on conferences, on social media, etc. I was interested to dive into the business model of the Finanser and explain, maybe you can explain to us how it all started.
Oh, long story, but long story short. 2002, I was made redundant because I've always been a troublemaker, which is my official title these days on LinkedIn. And basically, I tell people the way it is, the way I see it. So originally, back then, I started getting work writing research reports about where banking and technology was going. And then I was invited to start blogging about that subject in early 2007. And because I'm a really sad, nerdy, stupid idiot, I decided to do that every single day. And I've done it every single day since the 1st of February 2007, which is blog about technology, finance. And these days it's a bit wider. I do make some economic and political commentary, but I try and avoid economics and politics because that's the area where you move into stupidity. I'm much better at talking about technology.
How do you decide the content that you want to publish on the Finanser?
I mean, it's purely what excites or interests me, or that I think is worth a commentary on. And a lot of what goes into finance then becomes part of my presentations and books. In that, when you write something every day, and typically I try and write 1,000 words or more, it stays in your head. And then if it's in your head, you can present that back as fact when talking at conferences. So it's a virtuous circle between producing something every day, producing books and talking. And the only thing I try and stick to is it has to be something that I can always bring back and relates to banking and finance.
And how did you grow your audience? In the beginning, were you read by bankers? Who were your first readers? And how did it evolve? And how did you adapt to the evolution?
Well, I mean, to begin with, in some ways, it was quite easy because not many people were blogging about finance and technology or being active on social media. These days, it's much harder because there's thousands of people. But when I started back in 2007, it began by working with a couple of sites like swiftcommunity.net and finextra.com. And then I created my own platform and it grew from there. So I already had some following at that point, mainly in the financial community. And then it became the fintech community. And that when you look at the dates, fintech wasn't really a thing until the 2010s. So in the 2000s, it was mainly banking people. And it's quite interesting if you look at what I was writing about. In the 2000s, I was writing mainly about regulatory change in banking. And yet in the 2010s, it was mainly about technology change in finance. And so things move on. And right now, the main thing I'm writing about is how, going back to what we said before about digital for good, technology and finance can change the world, and artificial intelligence can make money think for us, which is my big theme right now. When we don't have to think about money because money thinks for us.
And if we look behind the curtain, you have a team of people also writing for you, or you're fully writing your blog posts and you do everything on your own?
No, there's no team. It's all me every day.
Okay. Wow, that's impressive.
I told you I'm boring.
So your main activities is advising, board seat, writing, any other activity? Presenting, conferences, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, traveling the world, presenting at conferences, writing, producing books, my new book just in development right now. And that's quite a long process because there's lots of editing, advising fintech companies, being a mentor to some fintech founders, working with banks as part of their advisory board, a whole mixture of things. So it's a good life. I'm very lucky.
Yes, I would say we have a comparable life. It's more or less what I do. One last question about the Finanser. I would like to know the future plans. Do you have in mind partnerships or expansions in specific areas?
Well, I think the biggest thing going forward is obviously going back to artificial intelligence, and that ChatGPT can write my blog for me. I did actually ask it to write a blog entry the other day, and it came up with one that was better than I could write. So I'm kind of going, so if these systems can replace me, what do I do? And there's a number of factors in that question. One is the only reason why ChatGPT can write a better blog entry than Chris Skinner is because Chris Skinner has written thousands of blog entries over the last 15 years. So it's just amalgamated that structure and phraseology into something that looks impressive, but actually it's just integrating the stuff that's been created by humans that's gone before. Mm-hmm. So humans will always be needed going forward. From my side, I guess my main focus is on things like cryptocurrency, quantum computing, artificial intelligence, and where we can make money. And it's in those areas I think we'll make the most money. I'm very excited by what might happen to X, for example, which was Twitter, because Elon Musk has always been an advocate of Dogecoin. I'm not a fan of Elon Musk. I said the other day that Elon means elongated and Musk means stink. So I'm not sure whether that's a good or bad thing to say, but the future is one where it's pretty obvious. There's a lot of people creating a different world. And is it augmented, virtual, artificial, real? I don't know, except my bet would be whatever world it is, there will be a bank involved and money involved. That's where I'll be.
Yeah, that's true. So 2 last questions. One about children and the arts, because apart from being a fintech expert, you're also a children's author and a co-founder of the Portrait Foundation. Can you say a few words about this initiative?
Well, you're too kind, Celine. So during the pandemic, I started making up stories for my kids, and then I shared the stories with my publisher, and they were very kind, and they published them. In fact, they published 5 books, Captain Cake and the Candy Crew, series of books about teamwork, loyalty, diversity, and how to work together. And my favorite character is Private Potato, and Captain Cake and Lieutenant Chocolate, Sergeant Jelly have superpowers, and Private Potato has none, except she's the only one who can fly the ship and repair the ship. So without her, the Candy Crew would be nothing. And so that was fun. In fact, I've written a number of other events following on from the first 5 books, which we'll see if the publisher want us to take forward. And the Portrait Foundation is, a world famous portrait artist who's a friend of mine, Basia Hamilton, and has, produced portraits of many of people in high society in Europe and America, including Boris Johnson and Donald Trump's children, for example. She and I got together, we get on very well, and we created the Portrait Foundation, which is there to encourage children to paint their parents' portraits. Typically, children paint their mother's portrait, which I think is biased, but mothers tend to be a little bit more in the children's mind than fathers.
Okay. Thank you very much for taking the time. I always conclude my discussions with my guests on a book recommendation. So among all your books, which one would you say is the must read for our listeners?
I'm so tempted to say CaptainCake.com.
Why not?
But I'll probably say it's the next one, which is Intelligent Money, when your money thinks for you. But as that won't come out for another year, in the meantime, read Digital Human, how technology includes the whole world.
Great. Thank you, Chris. That was very insightful. Thank you for taking the time. And thank you very much to Mel, who kindly organized this call. See you soon.
Yeah, take care. It's a pleasure.
Bye. Thank you all for listening and sharing this moment with us. Don't hesitate to contact me on Twitter or LinkedIn to share your comments and reactions. You can also rate this episode on your favorite podcast platform. See you soon.